All right, welcome to a session on Financial Edge NXT, leveraging the Query API. I'm going to wait about 20 seconds just to see if anyone else joins, and then we'll get started. All right, let's go. Well, I'm really excited to be with everyone today to talk about the Query API and some of the ways that we've been using it. You've got a chat section, so please submit any questions there. I'll be sure to make some time at the end, but I don't have a PowerPoint today, so we're going to dive right in and actually walk you through, a Power Automate process of pulling a query from Financial Edge and utilizing it. Most of you should have this functionality already. It may be something that's rolling out to still some folks. So if you don't have this capability yet, it's certainly coming very, very soon. You will have this session recorded, so you'll be able to come back to it to walk through these steps and get a better handle on how to do it if you want to try to build one of these yourself at a later time. I am Barton Dyson. I'm with a company called npAutomate. We develop automations and provide implementations for nonprofits. We mainly focus on Financial Edge and Razor's Edge, and our area of focus today is Financial Edge. So without further ado, let's get going. I'm going to share my screen and see if this works for us. And we're going to start by talking about Power Automate and how to get to these query components that we want to see. The very first thing I want to encourage you to look at and reference is a few samples that are in the development environment under the community section. So these are some things you can reference later, and used a few of these as guides in the past. And so if you just go over to the community section under developer.blackbaud.com, and I think if it's a little easier if you choose discussions instead of recent discussions, but just search on Query API and hit enter, and you're going to find some pretty good stuff here. Definitely want to highlight two for you that I think will be really useful. These items from Alex Wong. Even though they're using the ad hoc query, which is a little different than what we're going to be using today, we're going to take an easier approach using an existing query as opposed to having to build one through code. It's still some useful tools of maybe taking the query result and inserting it into SQL as an output. We'll talk about how to get to that today. Also, this one from Ashley Moose is really, really good about how to take a query and get it over to Excel or CSV or send it to OneDrive. So we're going to show you some of these examples, but these are also some good things to refer back to if you want some other examples and want to maybe import in some examples. All of these are for Razor's Edge, but I'm going to show you how you can make them reference Financial Edge instead. So as I pointed out, we're going to be playing with the queries today. So most of you can know that you can create queries in the database view of NXT, and you can build them for GL, AP, AR, fixed assets, whatever you want. You do have, some of you this may still be rolling out, but you do have access to the queries in some cases in the web view also. So that's not a requirement, I don't think, in order to use this API, but I think you're starting to see that rolled out into things like GL and AP. If you don't see that yet, it'll be there very soon. Now, in order to get to all the documentation about the Query API with Financial Edge, we want to go to developer.blackbaud.com, and we want to go find the APIs. Once we get to those, we know we want to work with Financial Edge, so we want to go to the API reference. Then we want to go to Financial Edge NXT. And then finally, there's a whole new set of endpoints just for query. So we've got GL, AP, fixed assets, and this query section covers all of those: GL, AP, fixed assets, soon to be AR, and anything else that you may want to work with. So once we click on that, we get an endpoint reference. And so this is what we're going to use as our guide to figure out what types of instructions we need to provide within these calls, within Power Automate to get the queries that we want. As you're probably aware, there's no built-in connectors for Financial Edge. So everything we use leverages what's called the Blackbaud Sky add-in. So it's part of what's available through Blackbaud. I'm going to show you how to use that in just a second if you haven't seen that. The first thing you've got to figure out is which query do you want to pull, and you've got to find it. You've got to find the ID for that query. And so there's two ways to get to that. There's this endpoint that I'm going to show you how to use in just a second called the get query list. And this can be used to figure out the ID of the query, because then we're going to use that to actually run that query within Power Automate and then do something with the results. So this is one way of getting the result. It's kind of nice in Razor's Edge. You can just go to database view and click view properties and see the ID, but that's not presented in Financial Edge. What I discovered earlier is what is also available is if you do have these queries appearing, the query you want to create and pull into Power Automate, another way of getting to this query is by choosing to run it from here. And we're just going to be looking at a list of transactions, just simple GL transactions today. What's really impactful about query is that you may have all types of ways that you want to summarize data, group data together, get balances, get summary information, get vendor subtotals or something like that. So the query is kind of an effective way of going ahead and getting the data the exact way you want it in order to grab what you need to work with. Maybe even there's some fields that aren't available yet through the API using other GL or Financial Edge endpoints. But if you run this query within the web view and you click copy link, that link also gives you the API. So in this specific example, the ID I'm looking for this query I want to run is right there. So if you run a query and click that copy link, that's one way of getting that ID. Another way of getting that ID is going to be within this flow that we're getting ready to build. So we're going to start by just showing you how to find the ID, and then we're going to actually walk through a process of calling this query through Power Automate and doing something with the result, either sending it to CSV or sending it to a JSON format, which can be used to do a lot of different things. So it all starts, and I've got it defined here, but I'm going to show you what you want to use. So you'll start a brand new workflow within Power Automate, and you can always add a schedule to it later if you want it to run over and over again, but I always start with a manual trigger initially, which means I got to click a button to run it. And the one you want to use for anything related to query in Blackbaud is going to be under this Blackbaud Sky add-ins. Really anything related to Financial Edge, this is what you want to use. So you can apply this to pulling vendors, pulling invoices, or in this case, pulling a query. And you want to use this send an HTTP request. And that's exactly what I did down here. So let's remove that. And let's take a look at what this one is. I'm going to rename it to get query list. And then anytime we use this call, we're going to either get or post or do something else, and then we're going to stick a path in there of what we want. And that goes right back to this API definition. So it'll tell you here, I want to get a query list. So I'm going to use get. I'm not going to use post. I'll use that later on. And then what I want my path to be will be everything after blackbaud.com until I get to a question mark. So in this case, I want my path to be query and queries. Now, in order for this to work with Financial Edge, we need to put in 2 parameters at a minimum to find what we want. The first needs to be product, and it needs to be FE. And then the second one, which doesn't apply to RE at all, is module, where we choose if it's GL, AP, AR, fixed assets, or cash receipts. So then we choose or enter general ledger. So that's what I've done. Sorry, let me get back to it. That's what I've done with this first call in order to say, okay, I want query, queries. And this is nice. It even tells you, give me the relative path after the blackbaud.com within that link that you see on that API page. And then we input those parameters that we want to get the list. So we're ready to go. We can save that and run it. Now, I'm a big fan of doing things iteratively. So I like to do a couple of steps, run it, see what the result is, do a few more steps, see what the result is, which I think is really useful when working with Power Automate. And in this case, we've got to do it because we got to find the ID. We got to figure out what that ID is, assuming you didn't use that other method to find it by copying the link that we looked at. Now, the last time I ran this, it ran in seconds. And now it's not. So like anything that we do when we're doing a demo, things don't always work the first time we try it, which is hilarious because I've done this 3 times today. So let me just cancel that and edit it and make sure I had everything configured correctly. Got the right one, product FE, module, general ledger. Get query list. We know that we want query queries. Got product FE, general ledger. Let's try this one more time. There might be so many people using the API for sessions today that we just tripped it up. And lo and behold, it worked perfect the second time in 1 second. So not sure what happened there. So, okay, so this gives you a list of all the queries that you have in the system, in this case related to general ledger. Now, if you had hundreds of queries, it'd be a really long list and you'd have to go look at, for it. So you do have other parameters you can use like my queries only, or I think even a date format, sort descending, and other pieces to help you kind of find the one you're looking for. But in this case, I've got a simple little database and I've only got one query, and it's this transaction query we're going to be working with. So now I know the ID is 32. So use this get query list to find your ID, or use that copy link feature from looking at the query within the web view. So now we're off to the races. We want to go ahead and run that query and then do something with the results. And so there's a specific set of steps we want to do with that. Again, you can import some of these other examples that you see within the community to get some ideas. But I've gone ahead and pre-built this, and then we're going to go ahead and use this to create it again within my other flow so we can see what's necessary. Now, keep in mind, when we run this query, it could take 10 seconds. It could take 3 minutes. Just like when you run a query in Blackbaud, it could take longer, for example. So you're going to run a query, and then you're going to loop through and kind of pull the results until it's done. I'm delaying every 15 seconds. And then once it's done, we're going to take those results and do something with it. So the very first thing we got to do is create a variable, and we'll call it query completed. So let's do that as our next step. So we're going to initialize a variable, if I can spell correctly. We're going to call it query completed, and actually query complete. And then we're going to input false as our default value for now. That'll switch to true once the value is good. And I don't want to just type in false, as you can see here. I want to actually use that as an expression. So be sure when you do that, you actually capture that expression of false as opposed to just typing in false, for example. That's pretty important. You'll see why in just a moment. We could rename this to say this is our query complete variable if we want, but we're getting the result we need there. So the next thing we want to do is run the query. And so we're going to actually ask for the information. Again, we're going to use the Blackbaud Sky add-in. So if you just type Blackbaud and choose Sky add-in and use that same thing we use for anything related to Financial Edge. One thing to note is some of you use the new designer within Power Automate. Your screen may look a little different. I just still have it quite adapted to it. But everything else in terms of what you're putting in is identical in terms of what you're asking for. So now we actually want to run the query. So I'm going to rename this to run query. And now the endpoint we want to leverage is called post query execution job. Now there's two ways you can do this with Blackbaud, whether it's Razor's Edge or Financial Edge. You can build a query from scratch, which is somewhat advanced, and you've got to put in all the kind of the parameters, the criteria, the output, the sort, etc. Or what we're going to do today is you can just take a query that you've created and saved and use that query, which we do quite a bit when we help organizations do lots of different things and have been for Razor's Edge and Financial Edge over the last few months. So it's a pretty handy tool. You can certainly move up to this one, but you start with this one as a starting point. And some of those lessons from Alex Wong really gets into that other ad hoc component within the community documentation. He's uploaded some examples there. So in order to execute this query, we're going to need to put in this particular link of query queries execute by ID, and then we'll put in the product and the module. So the instructions we want to put in is this, then we're going to put in the product and the module, and then we're going to put in the body of what it is we're trying to accomplish. So let's start by inserting our path. We want to make sure this is a post and not a get, because that's what it said back on our API page. Our product is FE, and our module is General Ledger. And you want to make sure these are spelled the exact same, case sensitive, all that good stuff that matches what you see on this page for FE and for General Ledger. Then for the body, back on here, it's going to show you a couple of options for what you can put in here and what these pieces mean. You want to use asynchronous, so you can give it time to run and you don't have to check it every 5 seconds as opposed to synchronous. And then you have an output mode that you can select. Until like a month ago, CSV was the only output mode, and then people had to convert that to JSON and other components to work with. And wonderful news, Blackbaud made an update, so now you can select other output formats. So we can choose either CSV or JSON. And that's what I'm doing here. So I can actually see the results, and Power Automate loves JSON. There's so many things you can do with it at that point. But if you wanted to take this query and just send it directly to OneDrive, then you would either leave off output format and it'll default to a CSV output, or you put in output format CSV, and then you'll get the result you want. So you can use that same sample from the API page to ask for what you want here. And the most important thing is you put in the ID number of the query that you're trying to run. So that's great. So we're running the query, but again, it could take 20 seconds. It could take 5 minutes. So now we need to loop through and come up with a way of knowing when it's done. And in Power Automate, that's done through something called a do until. And we're going to do until this variable, which is called query complete, is equal to true. So very straightforward. We're going to say, okay, now we want our expression to say true, because right now it's set to false, and it's not going to set to true until we meet a condition within this do until. So what we want to do is just set up a delay or a timer. And I always do, some folks will do 30 seconds. I like to do 15 seconds for these. It's really a matter of personal preference. Since you're doing it asynchronous, you can wait as long as you want. I'd give it at least 10 seconds. But basically, we're going to wait. Every time this thing loops through, we're going to count to 15, and then we're going to check to see if the query is done. If it is, then we're going to mark this to true. We're going to come out of this loop and do something with the results. So there's one more API endpoint we need to work with, and that's to check the status of the result. And so there's a get query execution job status. And that's how we're able to kind of run a process through the API and then constantly check it to see when it's done. And once it's done, we can work with it and do something with it. And so that's where we're going to use one more Blackbaud Sky add-in. Send an HTTP request, and now we're going to get the status of that item. So I've already got it over here, so we can borrow some of our stuff that we've used. And the code for that status, if you look back at that API page, is query plus jobs, but then you actually have to insert the ID that you want. And so we get to that by asking for this piece within it. And I'm going to show you what this code looks like in just a second. So you'll want to insert this. So if you actually run this query and you look at the output of it, it's going to give you an ID. So the body of this result of run query is going to give you an ID. It's a space there. You know what? Just to be safe, name it the same, just so we're lined up and consistent with our other sample. And so within the body of the output, if you were to run a test and look at it, it's going to give you an ID. So right under the body of the run query, we just want to use the question mark, which gets you to that next level, and we want to ask for the ID. Once we select that, I need to put that in the expression, not the dynamic content. It's going to drive it and put it in there exactly the way that Blackbaud wants to see it. So we're asking for the query, we're asking for the jobs, and then we're asking for that specific item that we want. From there, we've just got to do a few different things. We've got to do product module and these other fields that we need to fill in. So let's go ahead and type those in. These will be query parameters. General ledger is all one word. Then we need include read URL, which is again documented on that page. And then the last one's called content disposition. And this will ensure that we get the output in a format we can work with and once completed. So even though I'm using my other one to get to these results, it's all right here within this section. So you'll see here, you want to know when it's completed, not like when it's running. In the content disposition, you want to have an attachment, not something displayed as a web page. You want it to be provided to you so you can work with it. So these pieces are all there and documented for you. And let's rename this to check status. All right. And then finally, we need to keep checking that status. And once our result has been met, we're going to update that variable. And we're going to update it to this particular value. So we're going to set a variable within this loop. And again, if I'm going too fast, the good news is this is recorded. You can come back to it later and see this information and see the code that's being used. But essentially what we're doing here is a phrase is saying is when the check status, which is going to be an output of that checking the status, when that status is marked as completed, this will show as true. And then we'll be in good shape. So we can actually just run it. From there, let's save it real quick. That. Just see what we get. Again, we're not going to even be doing anything with the result at this point. And I do need to make sure I've got a few different add-in links. Make sure I'm using the right one. Make sure I'm hitting the right environment. Now we can start to see the engine running and what it's doing. So again, I left in that get query list in there. It appears to be hung up on again, which is really weird.
Hey, Barton, while we're waiting for that to buffer a little bit,
yeah,
we have a couple questions in chat.
Sure.
Amy asked about maybe 5 or 6 minutes ago that if you're pulling a larger file, like a transaction query, should you give it more time before checking?
Sure. I mean, I've got this do until set to, you can set limits for it and it'll run 60 different times. But yeah, if it's a big file and you can kind of, when you run it in the system, see how long it takes to run that in the system. That'll give you a little better idea. This is unusual because this normally runs in 15 seconds, but everything's just a little lagged today, it looks like. So it took, a couple of runs. So the first time this thing, it counted to 15, it checked the status, and it said, okay, it's still running, so it's not done. And that was the ID that we got back. So the next time I checked it, at 30 seconds, it said, okay, it's completed. So once it's completed, it gives you two additional things. It gives you a row count of how many rows you got, and it gives you what's called a SAS URI, and that's something you can actually work with to get to the results. So that'll be useful to you. Let me see if I can cut off my Teams so we don't have those interruptions. So that's great. And then we flipped this variable to true, and that's where that do until loop stopped. But no, to answer that question, absolutely, you could set it to a longer delay if you wanted to. It's just up to how many times you want it to loop through. Was there another question while I'm?
Yeah. Cameron asked if you type something in the values, such as typing false versus typing it as an expression function, what is the difference between that? Does it not just default as an expression?
It doesn't. It treats it more of a string versus an expression. So, and I could be wrong, but my experience with Power Automate is when you choose this type of Boolean, and Boolean is true, false, yes, no, 1, 0, whatever that may be, you want to use the expression. So you want to come over here and type it in, and you'll type false and then find that value. So that is pretty important, just like I did true here. And you can find some documentation about creating Boolean variables, through Power Automate, which can be useful for that. So, okay, so we got a result. Now we need to do something with it. So the very first thing we've got to do is get to that link that we just saw. When it finally worked and gave us a result, we've got to go get that link, and that's using an HTTP call. So I'm going to, now that I'm out of the loop and I'm good to go, I'm going to ask for an HTTP, which is called, this is the one we want. It's called HTTP. It does require a premium connection, but I think Blackbaud does too. A premium license with Power Automate. And we're going to do a get, I believe. Yep. And then in terms of what we're asking for, again, we want to do it as an expression. When we got that result that you just saw a moment ago under check status, when we got that result, it gave us in the body of the check status result, it gave us something called a SAS URI, if you recall. So that's what I'm asking for now. I'm saying, okay, I want you to reach out to that hyperlink and give me that item within this workflow. So then I can do something with it. I can send it to CSV, or send it to OneDrive, send it to SharePoint, or in this case, create a JSON output that we can view. So that's really all we're doing here, is we're getting this result, because all we got before was just a hyperlink to what's called a blob. So now we're getting it so we can do something with it. And that's all we have to do, is use that HTTP piece. Don't need authentication. Do a get, and then ask for that result, which again is asking for the piece, the action we use, check status, and then the SAS URI. So then we got a couple of things we can do. I mean, I can just kind of simply do this by asking for the body of this result just in a compose. And so let's just keep things simple for now. And if you've worked with compose, you can really put anything into that in order to get what you want. And all I want to do is get the body output of that HTTP, which is this. Now we can go one step further. Or actually, let's start with that now. I'll do it one more time, and then we'll pause for questions. I want you to see what this result looks like. So now if we run this, we're actually going to be able to get to and see the results that have been created. We'll walk through all these steps that have been run so far. Again, I should probably take out this get query list because it seems to keep slowing down today. But I'm going to leave it in because we don't need it anymore, right? I mean, we've already kind of figured out what the ID is, but I just had it in there still. Normally it takes a second. Right now it's not. It takes 23. And so now we're at the point where we've run the query. We asked it what we wanted. We gave it those instructions. And as soon as you run the query, the result you get is status pending, but it gives you that ID. And that was the ID that we embedded in that next piece when we were asking for the status of it. So again, this will probably run to 30 seconds and then be ready. But worst case, it'll be 45 if it goes to that next link. Maybe it is going up. And we know it worked because we already tested it before. And it looks like it's holding at 45. So now it's going to keep going. So now, the first time we ran it, it said it was pending. Second time we checked, 15 seconds later, it was still pending. But the third time we checked, we got completed and we got this link. And again, this hyperlink is what we want to read out. You could click on this hyperlink and actually see the results of that file. In this case, in a JSON format. If we had asked for it in CSV, it'd be in a comma delimited format. So then the variable changed to true. And then we asked for the item we wanted. What's funny about this HTTP call is it goes and grabs that link that we asked for, that quote SAS URI, but the output really doesn't tell us anything. It just says, okay, we got it. Now what do you want to do with it? And that's where you can use compose, you can use parse JSON, you can use anything else. And finally, we get to our stuff. Now we see that query, in this case, in a JSON format in order for us to be able to get to that and do something with it. So we've got each row of the query separated by brackets and then all the stuff that we want to see with that. Now, using this other example that Ashley created, I mentioned the one that Ashley put on the query API. If you go search for it in the community, her example is nice if you want to just create a CSV and send it to OneDrive or something else. So if you're just looking to create an Excel file based on that query, you can download the item, this example that she put in the community, and it's doing the same stuff we're doing. We asked for an item. We did a do until it's done. We got the results the exact same way. But then the next thing she did was just create a file. She put it in a separate or in a certain location within your OneDrive, gave it a name, and then chose the content and just had to stringify it. And that was it. So the overall result is very similar to what we did here. And so once you get to, in this case, this result, then you've opened a lot of opportunities. Getting it to this JSON format gives you the ability to maybe loop through each row of a query and do something with it, update a record, or maybe even send it to SQL Server, do a SQL insert to populate a data warehouse, or do some other interaction with it. So the last thing I do want to show you is the ability to do what we call a parse JSON. So that way you can kind of see what all the fields are if you don't want to have to do it all through code. So some of you have probably worked with this in the past. If you've spent any time in Power Automate, is taking one of these results and just defining what all those pieces mean. And so if you were to do this here to make it a little easier to read,
Hey, Barton, we're getting a little technical difficulties from you, and you're buffering right now. All right, looks like he's going offline. Well, while he's doing that, I'm going to give a shout out and promote the innovation grants. And I'm going to put a link here in the chat. And this is an awesome opportunity to win one of 3 innovation grants. Actually, npAutomate, where Barton is a principal there, is one of the sponsors. I should highlight that these are due at 5 p.m. I think there's going to be some leniency there. It only takes about 2 or 3 minutes to upload an application. But if you could get that in, after this is over, we might have to end a little sooner than later, since Barton looks like he got booted off. The other thing I'll do is launch a survey, and this is just a survey to address how today's session went.
the schema,
There you are.
that's what we have when we were reviewing that item a moment ago. So we would just paste that result we just saw in the compose, and we could use that to generate a schema. And then you'll see all those values created within the output. And then that'll give you a chance to actually work with the JSON as opposed to getting the result. I'm going to stop sharing because my machine is kind of locked up. Again, this is all recorded, so you'll be able to come back and review those steps that we took. If you'd like to send me any specific questions or want me to send over an example of what we worked on today, I'm happy to send you some more detail. So feel free to email me. It's my first name, barton.dyson@npautomate.com. I think it's also within the profile section. So feel free to contact me if I can help further. But hopefully this will open up some ideas and help you get started with working with the Financial Edge Query API to get to some of those other pieces, whether you want to create a flat file or CSV document, or whether you want to do something with the results. And that's where working with that JSON output can really be helpful. Any other questions from the group?
No, thanks a lot, Barton. We appreciate your time walking us through this. While you buffered out a little bit like 5 minutes ago, and while you did that, I just highlighted these innovation grants and want to pitch that to everybody. I put the link here in the chat, and then please fill out the survey. Other than that, thank you, Barton, for your time, and everyone have a great BB Dev Days.
Great. Thank you all for attending.
All right.